Today on the Diabetes Podcast.
So here's a common belief. Type 2 diabetes is a blood sugar problem. It's not. When somebody asks me, have you seen such and such? Do you think this supplement works? The answer isn't, no, it doesn't work. It thimble works.
It's not even bringing a knife to a gunfight. It's bringing a knife to like a rocket fight. Hello and welcome to the Diabetes Podcast. I'm Richie.
And I'm Amber.
And Amber, I am stoked. Today is the final episode of our series on the Grift. We've talked about what doesn't work and who is not working for you. Today, we're talking about what does, what actually moves the needle for type 2 diabetes and prediabetes.
Exactly. So just to recap, in episode 1, we talked about the most popular dietary supplements, chromium, cinnamon, berberine, apple cider vinegar, the full roster, and measured them against the biology or pathophysiology that is type 2 diabetes. And most of them did not survive the measurement because... Surprise. Yes, I know. Shocking. The A1C.
Which is only going to land for the folks out there that are watching extremely old episodes of Gomer Pyle, which is
well, the show wasn't Gomer Pyle.
Was it? No, you're right.
The Andy Griffith Show.
But Gomer Pyle had his own show.
Oh, did he?
Oh yeah, he was a Marine, and they tried to integrate his singing in there because Jim Nabors had had a beautiful singing voice.
What an education!
I struggle to remember people's names, but I can tell you useless facts.
Yeah, we're not gonna pick that apart on today's show. We need to cover other things. Fair enough. We'll talk about those supplements and the recap for episode 1, which was how those supplements showed no A1C reduction, at most about a 0.2 A1C reduction, just really marginal fasting glucose changes, if any. And it just doesn't match the scale of the disease.
Yep.
So in episode 2, we reverse engineered the supplement ad itself, the 7 parts of that ad, which are the wide symptom net, creating a hidden villain, ensuring you get some emotional release. There's authority disruption, use of science language, a miracle ingredient or cure, and an urgency close. And we showed you how each step was not really designed to inform you, but convert you to a buyer and get you to the cash register to buy the supplement that really doesn't move the needle. And then in episode 3, we looked at we asked the question, what happens when the person selling that supplement has a medical doctorate designation and they have that clinical expertise built in. So surely they know something, right?
Yeah.
Like, why would they be doing this? Which I don't know that we fully answered the why would they do this.
Why trust your doctor when you can trust this TV doctor?
Yeah. So we have, in essence, cleared the field. We have pulled the weeds, but now we need to lay the new crop, if you will. I think it would be unethical for us to say this is why all this stuff doesn't work and then buy without laying a framework for what does work and where does hope really lie. And so we're going to fill that empty space that was created by the first 3 episodes. And so I like to think of this one really as the most important part of the series, because debunking is only useful if you can fill that gap with something real. And if I'm telling you that supplement line of the celebrity isn't the answer, and I leave you with nothing, I've just taken away your hope without replacing it.
Yeah,
So
if you have to hack through the jungle of type 2 diabetes, you probably want to use a machete and not a butter knife.
Right. Good. This is why I leave the analogies to you. You did good.
It's almost all I bring to this podcast.
Yes. And so we're not talking about the theory of what moves the needle or talk about this in some abstract terms. Like, we're getting really, really looking at what it is that's going to progress away from
Yes.
type 2 diabetes.
Start doing these this week if you have not
Exactly.
done so already. And if you are doing so, keep dialing it up and you will see the A1C come down. You will see more consistent blood sugars, all of that.
Yep. In your actual body, in your actual life. And if you're listening to this podcast when it gets released, we're talking about making a shift after dinner, walking, possibly to change your blood sugar Monday evening, like right away.
Yep.
So,
Well, faster than that, I've had a CGM on for the past week. We've been just doing a little bit of experiment here on the Diabetes Podcast. And even for me, as a person not with diabetes, I can see an immediate drop in my blood sugar when I consume carbohydrates and I move immediately after. It just plummets. It absolutely, you can watch in real time the body respond as the muscles are absorbing the sugar through that GLUT4 pathway. So this is for everybody. This is a good human behavior that we as a culture probably need to start adopting.
Yep. So we're going to talk about why most approaches fail and really look at it from a systems perspective. So oftentimes, like that saying, if I had $1 for every time I heard, I've tried everything and nothing works, or some version of that same sentiment or sentence. And I want people who are listening who are like, I've said that to you. I want you to know I believe people when they say this. I believe that they are doing things, often many different things. They're usually cutting carbs, taking some supplements, trying intermittent fasting, they're walking, they're drinking lemon water or apple cider vinegar before or after meals, whatever they had kind of seen and wanting to try. They're doing what they've been told, either by ads, by influencers, by well-meaning friends, and sometimes even by their healthcare providers, and often in rushed appointments. Yet their A1C stays 7.2, or maybe it drops a little bit below 7 to 6.8, but then drifts back up across time. And their fasting glucose stubbornly sit above the target of 70 to 110, like somewhere around 130 to 150. And no matter what they do, it feels like they're just stuck in those high fasting glucose levels or post-meal levels. And then this kind of creates a little bit of like micro traumas for this person, because it tends to breed shame. I tried this, I tried that, and I failed. And it can also breed hopelessness and the exact emotional state that makes someone vulnerable to these sort of supplement ads and claims and looking for something different. So why does this happen? Why do people try so hard and then stall out? And it's not because they lack discipline. It's because they are targeting symptoms instead of targeting the system behind those symptoms that they're having. So I'm going to explain. So here's a common belief. Very, very common. Type 2 diabetes is a blood sugar problem.
That sounds right to me.
Right, doesn't it? Yeah. It's not.
Okay.
So that sounds paradoxical because blood sugar is what we measure. This is what A1C tracks. This is what the glucometer or the continuous glucose monitor shows. But elevated blood sugar is the output of the disease, or rather the result of the disease, and not the disease itself. In other words, it's the fever, not the infection. So the disease itself is a set of interconnected dysfunctions happening across multiple organs simultaneously. Your pancreas is producing insulin, but that insulin is producing less, or it's producing it with impaired timing of the meal. Your liver is releasing glucose into the bloodstream between meals, which is normal. But in insulin resistance, it releases too much and doesn't respond to the brakes that are put on it. Like, we've got enough now, you can stop. And your skeletal muscles, which are the largest, we've talked about this many times before, the largest glucose disposal site in your body, are taking up less glucose than they should because their insulin signaling pathway is impaired. That's that same kind of resistance there. Your visceral fat, which we've mentioned is the fat packed around your internal organs, your pancreas, your intestines, is metabolically active tissue that pumps out inflammatory cytokines like interleukin 6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha, which further worsens insulin resistance. And then your brain's appetite regulation centers may be dysregulated. Incretin hormones, which are the all too famous GLP-1 receptor agonists, and GIP, which is the glucose-dependent insulinotropic polypeptide, which help coordinate insulin release after meals. All those can be blunted.
As you're going through this in my mind, it's the Zach Galifianakis in the Hangover meme where he's got the numbers all coming in and it's just,
yes,
it's a lot. It's a lot.
To be fair, we did 13 podcast episodes on the 12 core defects of type 2 diabetes. So that was just a really quick summary of those.
That's actually a playlist now if you're on YouTube, if you want to check that out. And you've got, I don't know, like 10 hours
show
of
notes
time
have all that. So it's not one broken thing with type 2 diabetes. That's the whole point of that. It's not just one thing. It's a whole lot of things. It's a network of disruptions across your liver, muscles, pancreas, fat tissue, gut, and brain, all reinforcing each other in a cycle that's genuinely difficult to break with any one single intervention. And this is why supplements fail, not because they're all fraudulent, but because even a real effect on one minor pathway doesn't change the overall system. I like this analogy. I'm proud of this one. It's like bailing water out of a boat with a thimble when you've got 6 big holes in the bottom of the boat. You can't contest that thimble doesn't get water out of the boat. It does. But when you look at the overall scheme of things, that boat's going to sink.
We're going to need a bigger thimble.
I like that Jaws reference. Good job. So the question becomes, what interventions are powerful enough to change the system? What are the levers that actually address factorial dysfunction driving type 2 diabetes? And the evidence points to 5 specific levers. And we're going to dive into each of those 5, starting with the strongest.
I can count that on one hand.
I know, right?
All
on one hand. So these are the biological mechanisms, again, hearkening back to that series we did on the 12 core dysfunctions. So here are your 5 levers. Visceral. So this is the most powerful lever, visceral fat reduction. Just lose weight. Just lose weight.
I hope you get into detail. I've had some inroads in this lately, but this has always been my Achilles heel around my midsection, for lack of a better description. I can drop weight or gain weight, but that just did not budge historically.
And targeted fat loss is not necessarily a thing that has a lot to do with where you store your fat. And that this is really where genetics comes into play, which is, are you an apple or a pear? Body shape, and we've talked about absolute waist to hip ratio before. Just absolute waist circumference is one thing you could measure to know your risk. But not all body fat is metabolically equivalent. Subcutaneous fat, which is right underneath the skin, tends to be a lot less disruptive and harmful than visceral fat. Not all of your fat is as metabolically active as visceral fat. Subcutaneous might be something that's more cosmetic, historically speaking. And in fact, it's more of the Romanesque type beauty where you store, you can have as much fat on your hips. And
when you're saying visceral fat, basically you're not going to be able to pinch that.
Not typically, no, right.
Well, if it is truly around my organs, there's some layers of muscle that, you know, no matter what your core level of strength is, there is actual muscle in your midsection that prevents you from actually getting to the fat that is around your intestines.
I think I've heard people talk before where they've said like, he's just solid. Like somebody could have a really big abdomen, but they're like, it's solid. So I don't understand how they had a heart attack or how this happened. But that's really somebody who didn't have a lot of subcutaneous fat. Like you couldn't really pinch more than skin on the abdomen. but it was definitely
Around
quite
the,
a
yeah,
round
it
abdomen.
has to
So
be
this
beneath
is
the,
that.
the muscle. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's packed inside your abdominal cavity,
Mm-hmm.
surrounding and infiltrating your organs, wraps around your liver, embeds in your pancreas, sits between your intestinal loops, and unlike subcutaneous fat, is very, very metabolically active. And the reason this is harmful is because that metabolically active piece releases a steady stream of pro-inflammatory cytokines like tumor necrosis alpha, interleukin 6 resistin. These directly interfere with insulin signaling between your liver and your muscles, and they release free fatty acids at high rates, which flood the liver and promote hepatic insulin resistance. So hepatic meaning liver. They promote insulin resistance at the level of the liver and appear to impair pancreatic beta cell function, the cells that produce insulin that we talked about many times. And there's a lab called the Roy Taylor Lab at Newcastle University, which demonstrated this with elegant imaging studies showing that even modest reductions of pancreatic fat can restore first phase insulin secretion. And Taylor's work suggested that in many people, pancreatic beta cells become metabolically suppressed by excess fat exposure. So it used to be believed that these pancreatic beta cells are working hard, and then they poop out. And that can occur. It's thought they die off. And now, especially with this research, it's shown that they're really just down with fat, that if you get rid of a lot of the pancreatic visceral fat, you can wake these pancreatic beta cells up, that they might not be past the point of no return, in other words, which that study led to the DIRECT trial, which is one of, or some of that research and imaging led to the DIRECT trial, which is one of the most important studies on diabetes remission in the past 20 years. Published in the Lancet in 2018, the Diabetes Remission Clinical Trial, which is the DIRECT, enrolled people with type 2 diabetes diagnosed within the previous 6 years. They underwent a structured weight management program, and the results were striking. At 1 year, 46% of participants achieved remission, which was defined as an A1C less than 6.5.
Pause. Roll that back. What was that percentage?
46%.
Good night.
Yep.
So again, for the new listener, in just the general population, that number's about 3.
Less than 3.
Less 2.7 to be precise. That should give you some kind of idea that the scope of the impact of the stuff that we're talking about when we're saying these 5 things work. These 5 things work at an order of magnitude like that almost boggles the mind.
Absolutely. And this is even more evidence towards visceral fat reduction among those who lost 15 kilograms or more, which is about 35-ish pounds for us American citizens who, anyway, I'm not going into the metric system and why we don't use it, but the remission rate for those people who lost a really substantial amount of fat was 86%. Wow. 86%. So no supplement in the history of ever has produced anything remotely close to that number. No supplement has produced remission rates of even 5%. And what DIRECT showed was that the mechanism behind those remissions, specifically the reduction of ectopic fat, which ectopic refers to the fat around, more specifically, your pancreas and your liver. As that fat decreased, liver insulin sensitivity improved and hepatic output normalized and pancreatic beta cell function restored.
I'm sorry. The image that comes to my mind is the football dog pile where you've got your poor little pancreas there on the bottom and there's all these linemen on top of it. And that little pancreas is just, if you could just get the lineman off of it, just a little bit of room, maybe the pancreas can dust itself off and get back in the game. But,
I love your visual imagination.
I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry. It's great.
Give me some appropriate filmmaking tools and I can do good work.
Yep. So just to reiterate, this isn't about cosmetic weight loss. This is within the organs, that ectopic visceral fat.
This is
about
strategic
removing
weight
metabolically
loss
toxic
from a healthcare standpoint.
fat.
Like this is really how you
Mhm.
win the war against diabetes. To me, as I'm looking at, let's just say, typical Americans, right? And my experience being as a male, this is what I can speak to best. The difference between a guy in his 40s and a guy in his 20s, I can spot that from like 100 feet away. And it's usually at that midsection, regardless of what level of health they're in, regardless of how often they're exercising and all that kind of stuff. Typically, that midsection tends to get larger as we get older.
I wouldn't limit that to the male.
But I'm just saying,
it's
in
pretty
general,
universal.
I can, again, this is my experience is mine and equally valid to everybody else's. But I'm just saying, our audience tends to skew more female than it does male, despite the fact that diabetes is occurring at almost equal rates between the two genders. The guys,
It's that mustache, Richie.
what's that?
It's your mustache.
I don't understand.
You're like, what's that? You don't understand.
Besides it being awesome, but
Your mustache brings all the girls to the yard.
oh, that's not true. Because if it did, Amber would be out front with the shotgun trying to discourage people to get off the front lawn.
That's not true. Oh, I think we have taken a left turn here.
That one went off the rails. I apologize.
All right. So when we started this, we said, just lose weight. So I think it's important to pause here and say this is simple but not easy. That's a term that we like to use.
And I'm going to go out on a limb. Yeah. Probably everything that you're recommending today is simple but not easy. None of this is probably going to come as new information. Maybe the importance of it, or maybe the effectiveness of it as it relates to almost anything else that you're being marketed to on the internet, specifically on certain social media platforms these days. But this is the tried and true things that have always been recommended are almost the only things that really, really work well.
Yeah. Because it's really about the question of, number one, how to achieve this loss, and then how do you keep it off across time? Because remember that really astounding 46% and 86% remission rate. When you look at that study across 5 years, that becomes more of like 13% remission maintenance, which is still a huge accomplishment. I don't want to downplay it, but it doesn't look like those 46% numbers from the beginning. So to maintain that, it really looks like dietary changes, medications, structured programs through surgery, and some, everyone has to talk with their healthcare provider about what really is the right step for them. And we've had episodes where we discussed side effects of bariatric surgery as well. And maybe we need to revisit that, but it's always about risk versus benefit. And even in those who did not maintain remission in that direct trial, their outcomes were still better than those who had never achieved remission. Those who had a year or two more of their time in remission had better outcomes than those who didn't.
And we've said this before as well, that if it's just, if I can't completely get off the medication, like if I'm just not interested, well, if that's the case, then we're probably not the podcast for you. But every single person struggling with this disease can make it better, can reduce the symptoms, and can diminish the effect of the overall disease. The scale of that kind of depends on how far along you are on this path to diabetes.
Yes. And to clarify, remission is below a 6.5 A1C without medication. That is true remission, maintained for a minimum of 6 months or beyond. That is the definition of remission. So if you need medication in the meantime to get there, absolutely. But to truly say remission, it is without medication across time. Just wanted to clarify there. And so to put a kind of bow on lever one, that is the absolute biggest thing you can do is reduce visceral fat. That is the biggest lever, highest yield intervention for type 2 diabetes that you can pull. So lever two is skeletal muscle. This is your body's glucose sink. if you will. So your skeletal muscles, this is the largest organ system besides your skin, I would say, in at least relative to your body mass, it's your skeletal muscle. And they're the primary site of insulin-mediated glucose disposal, which is why we call it your glucose sink. So after you eat a meal, insulin is released, and roughly 70 to 80% of the glucose that gets cleared from your bloodstream is taken up by your skeletal muscle. So when your muscles are insulin resistant, the clearance from your bloodstream is impaired, and glucose stays in the bloodstream longer, levels raise higher, and the pancreas has to produce more insulin to compensate. So I often tell people who have type 2 diabetes that they're very likely producing more insulin than I am, but they're resistant to that insulin. They're not making enough to compensate for what is needed for the resistance. So here's where it gets interesting and where exercise becomes not just healthy, but really genuinely like an exercise prescription. It gets medicinal. Muscle contraction activates those. What am I going to say? I know you know this one.
GLUT4.
Yes, GLUT4 transporter through an insulin-independent pathway. And that means when you contract a muscle, when you walk, when you lift something, when you squat or you're climbing stairs, your muscles are going to pull that glucose out of the bloodstream, even with that impaired insulin signaling. Like you take that impairment off the table in some respects. You're bypassing that very mechanism, which is broken.
The analogy I like to use on this one is if you're trying to get into a room, I always go back to that again. Sorry, combat experience. That 4-man stack trying to go in through the front door, and I've got people behind the front door, and the front door is barricaded. Rather than breaching, which is what you're normally going to try and do, you can go in through the window. You can go in through a skylight. You could blow a hole in the wall and go. That's what GLUT4 does. It does not go through the door as normal because that's what diabetes expects. We're going to come crashing in, repelling through the skylight and get that sugar into that muscle. Get 80% of the sugar in your bloodstream into your muscle just through those muscular contractions.
It's a very, very powerful, strong pathway that you have at your disposal. Just movement gets that.
This is not the gym. This is not getting on a bike or a piece of equipment or any kind of, just moving, walking, moving my limbs, being not in a sitting or lying down state. Move your body. The sugar will go into the muscles. Yep.
And as you have very eloquently put a mental picture in our head, this is not a marginal effect. A single bout of exercise can increase this GLUT4 pathway for the next 24 to 48 hours, so the next day or two. And regular resistance training can also increase muscle mass, which is going to increase that total capacity of the glucose sink. And the effects are cumulative, which is even better. And they're sustainable in a way that no supplement can possibly replicate, because you're adding that external molecule and you're changing the tissue itself when you're building muscle mass. So there's a study that I want to mention here, and we've alluded to it in past episodes, but there was a 2002 paper in the New England Journal of Medicine, the Diabetes Prevention Program, which followed over 3,000 people with prediabetes. One group received metformin, one group was the control, and the other one was lifestyle intervention. And this included 150 minutes per week of moderate physical activity and some modest weight loss. So the average follow-up was 2.8 years, and the lifestyle group reduced their risk by 58%. This is when we talked about in the skeletal muscle portion of the 12 core defects. Metformin reduced the risk by 31%. So we have lifestyle intervention, 58%. Metformin reduced the risk by 31%. And
as I mentioned before, lifestyle intervention had significantly less intestinal problems associated with it.
You did in great detail
almost
mention
none.
that. Yes. And this was even more astounding risk reduction in people over age 60 with prediabetes. The lifestyle intervention group reduced their risk of developing type 2 diabetes by 71%.
Wow.
So they took it even higher from 58 to 71% in that older. So if you look at the biggest risk factor for developing type 2, it's over age 45. And so you take this age 60 group and you have a major intervention right there for reducing risk.
Yeah.
So physical activity, particularly when you increase that resistance piece to it, when you increase resistance training, it's like one of the most powerful like banging that drum. I feel it's the same thing over and over. But unlike berberine or cinnamon, any supplement, the magnitude of its effect absolutely matches the magnitude of the disease.
Yeah.
You're getting a big 5-gallon bucket to dump that water out, or a patch to fix that plug with.
Thimble.
No thimbles. Yes. None of those. So again, when we talked about interventions you can do today, if you go for a walk after dinner, that's going to improve your blood sugar right then, right when you go for that walk after dinner. So then you've got lever 3, which is hepatic sensitivity. So shushing the liver, quieting down. The liver's like, you're quieting down the liver. This is another thing that I hear all the time. I went to bed and my blood sugars were in like 95, and I woke up in the morning and my blood sugar was 160. I didn't eat anything.
Told them it's because they have a liver.
And I say it's because you have a liver. Yes, that is where that glucose is coming from. Your liver performs a process called gluconeogenesis, the manufacturing of new glucose molecules from non-sugar precursors like amino acids, lactate, and glycerol, which is the fatty acid backbone. It also stores glucose as glycogen. So glycogen just means stored glucose, and releases it as it is needed. So you can store 250 grams of glucose in your liver. That's a day's worth of glucose that you can store at the level of your liver. So people who are purposefully restricting carbohydrates, your liver can just pump that out anyway because it's storing it. And so it makes new from what you're not necessarily eating. So in a healthy metabolic state, insulin tells the liver when to stop releasing glucose. So insulin is like the light switch that comes and turns that liver off to not release glucose. And in insulin resistance, that brake doesn't, or that light switch doesn't work properly. The liver keeps producing and releasing glucose even when the blood sugar levels are already elevated. So blood sugar is 130, it's still putting out glucose, even though your bloodstream does not need that glucose, because the cells are sending the signal, we are starving, because the sugar has not gotten into the cell where energy can be created. So they're still sending the signal. So the liver gets the message and puts it out, even though it's not that.
It doesn't matter that you've sent the supplies out. If the person that needs the supplies still hasn't got it, they're gonna call you.
They're still gonna be
like,
yelling.
Where's my Amazon package? And like, I mailed that last week, and I don't. It's in transit, I promise, but it's going to be in transit for a long time until we get that signaling correct.
Yes. And so this is why fasting glucose is often the most stubborn number for people with type 2 diabetes. It's not so much about what you ate for dinner, but rather your liver's sensitivity to insulin stop signal. The good news is that hepatic insulin sensitivity responds strongly to the same interventions that reduce visceral fat. So what's good over here is good over here. The liver is one of the first organs to offload ectopic fat, which is that fat in the liver and pancreas, during weight loss. So in the direct trial, this is a really cool thing. Liver fat content normalized in many participants within weeks before any kind of significant overall weight loss had occurred, because as the liver fat decreased, fasting glucose dropped in parallel to that. And then you have metformin, which is the most prescribed first-line diabetes medication in the world. So if you go back to that algorithm of how you treat type 2 diabetes, diet and exercise is really the first line, but then the first line medication is metformin, because metformin is working on this lever of the liver of reducing the hepatic glucose release inappropriately. So it suppresses hepatic glucose output. So it's hitting the brakes. It's helping with the brakes. It's the brake fluid, maybe. I don't know. So it doesn't make your pancreas produce more insulin, which is why it rarely causes low blood sugar. So I'm always a little skeptical if somebody says that they had a low blood sugar response from metformin, because that's just not the mechanism of action. Right. Yes. It doesn't force your muscles to take up more glucose. It tells your liver to stop overproducing glucose. And it does so with a safety profile that's been validated for more than 60 years of clinical use. So I bring up metformin because of something we discussed in episode 3, which is the tendency in celebrity health and medicine to put the frame of the pharmaceutical industry as the enemy and the thing that you're trying to get off of and replace with this natural cure, or to replace with something natural like berberine, for example. If you understand what metformin actually does, which is correct a specific measurable hepatic dysfunction, which is central to the core defect of type 2 diabetes.
It works on your liver. That's the quick version of what you just said. Yes.
The idea of replacing it with cinnamon extract, which has no comparable effect on hepatic glucose output, becomes obviously inadequate. And even berberine, because the supplement industry is not regulated by the FDA, metformin has different, and we covered this in the past episodes, but metformin has 500 milligrams, 1,000, 1,500, the max dose of 2,000 milligrams.
As you can tolerate.
It is a controlled dose as you can tolerate. Whereas berberine, you don't know what's in it. You don't know the dosing per se because it's not regulated. And you don't know if that dose is going to give you really horrible diarrhea or not, or if it's going to be effective or not, when you have this very safe pharmaceutical grade drug that is quite inexpensive. We talked about this before, but anyway, that's your lever 3. So again, it's going to give you the output that you're expecting, whereas the others might not, or very likely won't. So then we have lever 4, which is more of my favorite lever, diet quality and fiber.
Fiber. All right. So at 37 minutes in, we finally get to the beans.
No, we haven't said beans yet. We're going to. Give me another minute.
Okay. All right. I didn't mean to steal your thunder.
No. Yeah, we're going to talk about food and frame it differently than what might be typical, because the diet conversation around diabetes has become very polarized in a way that obscures what the evidence actually shows, in my opinion. On one side, you've got this very aggressive, low-carb, ketogenic advocates who argue that carbs are the primary driver of type 2 diabetes, and that the solution, if these are the primary driver, then eliminate, like completely eliminate these. And then on the other side, you have traditional dietary guidelines emphasizing caloric balance and moderate carbohydrate intake. And then you have people like Dr. Gundry telling you that the type of plant food matters so much that lectins in beans are destroying your gut. So let's look at the weight of evidence and what the weight of evidence actually supports, which is that diet composition matters more than any single macronutrient. So I'm going to say that again. The composition in total matters more than the fat, the carbohydrate, or the protein composition of that meal. So let me go into greater detail. High fiber, minimally processed carbohydrate food sources like legumes, there we go, beans, peas, intact, unrefined whole grains.
So these are your groats.
Yes. Or just any grain that still has the whole brand, the whole wheat germ. So the number one ingredient should be whole, 100% whole wheat, 100% whole grain, not processed or refined, enriched wheat flour. If you see enriched wheat flour as the number one ingredient, then that is a refined grain. Yes. So that's not, you do not want the refined, you want unrefined whole grains. non-starchy vegetables, nuts, seeds. These are things that consistently improve glycemic outcomes in large, well-controlled, randomized, placebo-controlled, double-blind, these major trials. And beans and lentils specifically are among the most well-studied food in diabetes nutrition research. And
we've said it before, they really are the magic fruit.
Yes. A 2012 meta-analysis in the Archives of Internal Medicine found that increasing legume intake significantly improved glycemic control. These are the very foods that Dr. Gundry warns you to avoid and then sells you supplements to replace. Not being subtle in that irony. It is just astounding. So fiber deserves particular attention because it operates through multiple mechanisms simultaneously. You have soluble fiber, which slows gastric emptying, blunts post-meal glucose spikes, feeds beneficial gut bacteria by producing these short-chain fatty acids like butyrate that improve the intestinal barrier function and the sensitivity to insulin. It increases satiety, which is that feeling of fullness, which supports the caloric deficit needed for visceral fat reduction. And it favorably modifies the bile acid pool, which has emerging connections to glucose metabolism.
And I think we've talked about this before, but the win of this working is the in between meals. As the fiber content is increasing, it's not the, oh, I feel full as I'm eating. It's curbing that hunger response in between your normal meals where maybe you're having a tough time with snacking or I just don't feel full or any of that other kind of stuff. This is that forming that bridge.
Yes. And so that part about the bile acid pool, that was thought to really help with cholesterol, taking that back to the liver for processing. But it's also working on the GLP-1 hormone. It's working on those hunger and satiety hormones in the gut. So, so very much what you said there.
Yeah, really the fiber bit is the natural GLP-1, exogenous GLP-1 alternative. Rather than the medication, maybe just try increasing the fiber in your diet first and seeing
gradually. Not megacolon blood. Gradually. So the average American...
as tolerated.
Yes, the average American consumes approximately, do you remember how many grams of fiber a day?
I want to say it's like for the average?
Yeah.
I want to say it's like 15.
Yes, okay. Very good. See, you say you just watch Season Don't Learn, but you got it.
Well, I won't say I've mastered the fiber bit, but I have figured out for me how to make sure that I get what by American standards is a mega dose just through my breakfast and my lunch and a snack in between. We can maybe talk offline or something. Or maybe we'll do some supplemental material about what I do. I try not to be prescriptive about that kind of stuff because it's probably going to work for everybody. But it is totally possible without adding a bunch of Metamucil to your breakfast or any of that other kind of stuff to just make better selections from your meals. And again, I'm doing it in 2 meals and a snack. So by the time I get to dinner, I can almost eat whatever I want. I've already met my fiber goals for the day. So
almost, but I would say your dinner looks very different now that since you've incorporated that than what your dinner used to look like in terms of like portion size and what you choose looks very different.
Well, part of that is because historically dinner was my, oh boy, we're going like, just please say it's buffet. So something like that, because I would either work through meals during the day and I would just like gorge later in the evening. If I have gotten it in if I have a decent dose of fiber with my breakfast and have a decent dose of fiber with my lunch, and when I say decent dose, by dinner, I'm normally somewhere in the 50 to 60 grams of fiber range.
I was going to say the recommendation for metabolic health is 25 to 35 grams a day, but some researchers recommend more, and you're definitely doing more.
And I've worked up to that, but the secondary effect of that is I'm really just not that hungry at dinner. Yeah. I can still eat as much as I want, but just the desire to eat that much, it just isn't there. I've already done my eating work for the day, for lack of a better description, or at least that's from a hunger standpoint, that's how I feel.
Absolutely. And if you're not getting in 25 to 35 grams of fiber a day, it's really a missed opportunity in the management of type 2 diabetes. Like if you really want to manage your blood sugar control, that is it. And it's very, very, if not impossible, it's very, very challenging to get in 25 to 35 grams of fiber on a carbohydrate restricted diet. That is really the bottom line there. So here's the connection to our supplement episodes with that. Many of the gut health supplements being sold by celebrity doctors contain fiber, contain prebiotics or polyphenol. So polyphenols are characteristics of food that can act like hormones or messenger systems in your body, which are very high in your very colorful fruits and vegetables. So why not just have your colorful fruits and vegetables? So they're attempting to replicate this in a capsule for about $70 a bottle, when you could get it from a cup of lentils, a handful of almonds, a bowl of oats, or raspberries.
Raspberries and blackberries, man. Almost every breakfast opportunity has one of those just because of the extra fiber.
The food is way cheaper. The food is more effective. The food contains a full matrix of nutrients, and the food has the epidemiological track record of the healthiest populations on Earth behind it. And I'm not saying there's a single right diet. There's no like one right way to do this, but I will say the most research is behind your Mediterranean style type diet plans that has the biggest, and dietary adherence does matter. Cultural preferences matter. Individual disease response matters. Some people will do better with fewer carbohydrates, especially if their insulin plans are not managed very well. You will find that you'll do better. Some will do better with more whole food, plant-based carbohydrates, but the evidence is overwhelming that diet quality defined by proper fiber content, the degree of processing, the nutrient density, which is how much nutrition is there per calorie. And it's really a genuine lever in diabetes management. And usually the specific foods that are demonized by the celebrity doctors are the ones that have the strongest clinical evidence. Maybe that's because they see it as a threat to their enterprise. I've still yet to fully figure this out. Like I have guesses as to why, but I don't know why anyone would do
is
this.
No bean lobby. The poor bean industry doesn't have enough money to even give us a little kickback on every single episode for the amount of time that we spend
still haven't
recommending increasing the amount of beans in your diet.
No call.
No big beans.
Lever 5. So count them on one hand. Lever 5, sleep and stress.
I feel like this should almost be like lever 1.
You could make the argument because this lever is going to affect lever 1. Absolutely. Research backs that this lever, sleep and stress, have a huge component to do with your visceral fat.
In my mind, I almost tie it to like our last episode where we're talking about which positions do you spend the most time in. So of the things that I'm doing, I'm going to be asleep for almost, regardless of who you are, somewhere between a quarter to a third of every day. Nothing else that I do has that chunk of that pie. So making sure that the quality of that sleep, and as I'm sure going to get into, the amount of secondary effects that getting good deep sleep, getting good, all that stuff. It's just that this one, I would put this at number, if we're rolling this out as a try and master these things, you can't discount good quality sleep.
Yeah. Lots of really strong evidence tied to this lever for sure.
Healing occurs during sleep. Like the analogy that really hit for me was everybody knows that when you work out, you break down your muscles, right? And then they build back up and then you come back stronger. They build back up during sleep. So if I'm working out or if I'm doing anything, if I have diabetes and I'm in a state of, let's just call it, things aren't working as good as they can and things are getting worse. Yeah. If I want to get better, the only time that I get better is during that sleep window. My healing, regardless of whether it's skeletal muscle improvement or whether it's metabolic function, all that kind of, the healing occurs during that sleep window. So if I'm just going to discount that, if I'm going to take 8 and I'm going to settle for 6 or 5 or 4, if you want to talk about really, really hamstringing any kind of healing effort that you've got going on, this to me should probably be number 1. It's that important.
I won't fight you on that. The evidence will support you on it as well. I wouldn't dare fight you on, no, this is lever number 5, not 1. I wouldn't dare, because it is such strong. There is such strong evidence behind it. And I want to also say that we're not talking about like somebody with chronic insomnia,
right,
like getting 2-3 hours of sleep. And that's pretty obvious. But even somebody getting 6 or 6.5 hours of sleep versus 7 or 8.
Well, yeah,
that's
just
a huge
the difference between
difference.
6 hours and 8 hours. That's another sleep cycle.
Yeah.
That is you're sitting on a gold mine, Trebek.
So let's talk about another landmark study, because this one I think is the strongest one to support your stance that this should be labor 1. If we were making an argument of that, like this study.
I'm not arguing with Amber. I know better than that.
No, you're not arguing with me. You're just making an argument. So
I'm serious. I wasn't arguing with you. Don't let this come back on me later.
Anyway, in 1999, in the Lancet, they took healthy males, no diagnosed diabetes type 2 or prediabetes, nothing. And they restricted their sleep to 4 hours each night for 6 nights. And that reduced their glucose tolerance to a level consistent with that of somebody who had pre-diabetes.
So
6 nights in healthy
in less
people.
than a week, I can go from healthy to pre-diabetes just by reducing. Let's just assume that they were getting some really good sleep. By cutting it in half, I can induce, or at least I can mimic, the measurable effects of a disease state in less than a week.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Or at least the beginnings of a disease state.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, we've said pre-diabetes is diabetes. If we as a culture start to apply some urgency around the diagnosis of pre-diabetes, instead of let's just watch it for 5 to 10 years and see it miraculously become type 2 every single time.
Let's just watch that avalanche roll down the mountain.
It just keeps going on right on down. Like maybe the rocks will go back uphill. Maybe they will. No, they don't. They don't ever go back uphill. The time for that rollout. Yeah, not without intervention. Not without a lot. And the simple, not easy. Not without somebody pushing that thing back in the opposite direction.
Yep. And I think it's because there's so many different pathways that this is working on, because inadequate sleep increases cortisol secretion, particularly in the evening, which
is my inflammation, right?
And that's going to promote hepatic glucose, so liver.
So not just inflammation, the liver stuff as well, right?
Output, and impairs insulin signaling. It reduces growth hormone pulsatility. I know you're going to make me describe what in the world I'm talking about. I don't think that's a word. It's a word. Okay.
Oh, my pulsatility.
My pulsatility is having problems. So this is a really cool mechanism when you break it apart. So I'm going to try to walk through it. So growth hormone pulsatility. So growth hormone is not released as a steady drip like the leaky faucet. It comes in discrete bursts, or one could say pulses, hence pulsatility.
Gotcha.
The biggest, most important pulse happens during that first bout of deep, slow wave sleep, usually within the first 90 minutes of the night. And pulsatility refers to this rhythmic burst pattern. And the body responds to growth hormone differently when it comes in these bursts rather than a flat drip, which is why your body does it. And the way so when you cut your sleep short or fragment it, like you wake up repeatedly or staying up too late, you lose that deep, slow wave sleep disproportionately. That's where the largest growth hormone lives, is in that very first pulse. And so when you reduce deep sleep, you reduce both the amplitude, you blunt the amplitude and the frequency of those growth hormone pulses. And so talking about tissue repair and that connection to that, during those growth hormone pulses, your body is doing protein synthesis, muscle repair, cellular maintenance. Muscle tissue specifically matters here because skeletal muscle is the single, it is the single biggest glucose sink that we have, and it's the single largest site of insulin mediated glucose disposal. So if you're not repairing and maintaining that muscle optimally, over time, you're degrading the very tissue that's going to be the sponge for that glucose. And so then you've got a direct glucose metabolism connection because growth hormone also promotes fat oxidation or the burning of fat for fuel, which spares glucose and helps maintain metabolic flexibility. And we talked about metabolic flexibility in another podcast as well. And when growth hormone pulsatility is flattened by poor sleep, you lose some of the fat burning preference, and the shift in fuel utilization goes in more unhealthful directions. So it's not just that sleep deprivation makes you tired and eat more. It's actively dismantling that hormone repair that your body has in place. And it really has deep sleep as that trigger for repair. So as you said, that's another big that could get that lever 1 instead of lever 5 by that for sure. So the other mechanism in which sleep can do this is that it increases sympathetic nervous system activity, which drives insulin resistance directly, and it dysregulates appetite hormones. So the ghrelin, the hunger monster ghrelin, as we called it, and leptin, which promotes overeating and weight gain, feeding back into that visceral fat accumulation. Because if you're overeating, you have excessive calories. And so chronic psychological stress. So we've gone to sleep and now we're going to chronic psychological stress. That can operate also in overlapping pathways to the sleep because of sustained cortisol elevation that comes from that. And it's not that it feels bad. It has really concrete, measurable metabolic consequences. It raises fasting glucose. It increases visceral fat deposition or the placement of fat into and around the visceral organs. It increases the immune function. So it gets you more pro-inflammatory, and it depletes the executive function willpower that helps you maintain any dietary changes that you've decided upon and exercise habits that you have. And that's why somebody can be doing everything right, eating well, exercising, taking their medication, and still see poor results. If they're sleeping 5 hours a night or living under chronic financial, emotional, relational, professional stress.
Nobody has to deal with any of that.
Right. We're all stress-free around here. But all of those things are working against the other interventions. So you can, in many ways, say that lever 5 is the one ring to rule them all, if you will, because it does drive the other pathways. And so, not to beat a dead horse, but supplements don't address this. There's no way, no capsule can substitute for an extra hour of sleep. Yeah. No pill can resolve chronic stress.
An extra hour, a consistent extra hour of sleep, I think is a better way to. We've already demonstrated that short-term sleep loss can have some big swings on metabolic health. But as far as fixing this long term, adopting strategies that are going to enable you to consistently sleep better are what we're talking about.
Yes, all those levers are going to require structural changes, system changes, sleep hygiene, boundary setting.
But another tilt for sleep, I would say, is like, this is the one that honestly, I can't figure out how to, like everything else might cost money. Or like, the other stuff, there's a common argument that we get, which is eating healthy is really expensive. And I'm happy to change your mind on that one, but it may cause you to spend more money on some things maybe that you don't currently. And maybe even if you do, shoot, just if we just offset the dining out portion to the more prepared meals portion, you can largely offset that. But I guess what I'm getting at is
probably the easiest one.
What we're talking about is being still and quiet and not doing anything for a longer period of time a day. There really isn't any financial cost to that. This one, as far as low barriers to entry, we're just asking you to get good at this one thing that everybody does already, but maybe don't think about what would it look like to get better at this. Not just increasing the hours, but increasing the actual quality of the time.
Yeah. And I would say, yes, sleep is part A of the AB lever to lever 5.
Yeah.
The other side of stress is more challenging for people to do on their own. And some might argue that there is a financial reason for their stress, or there's some other reason for their stress. And we did speak to that in some part on the last episode the interview that we did. All right. So now I want to give you something to think about that's going to hopefully fundamentally change how you evaluate any diabetes intervention going forward.
Okay.
The concept we've been building all series long is the scale of effect. Talked about it. Well, the thimble versus the patch, or the 5-gallon bucket analogy. Not everything works equally. And that's not a criticism to this, it's physics. And as an example, little tugboat and an aircraft carrier are not moving the same amount of water. They're both boats, not the same. And so here's how the interventions we've discussed across the entire series stack up against others in terms of their effect on A1C. The single most common, so like A1C, that is the marker that is used to measure blood sugar control.
Right.
It's somewhat flawed for sure, because it's your average over 3 months, more heavily weighted on the most recent month. But that is like the biggest tool that we have to really see, like, how does the needle move? So at the low end of moving that A1C needle, you have supplements. Cinnamon, roughly 0.1 to 0.2% A1C reduction in the most favorable, usually somewhat biased studies. Chromium in kind of a similar range. And again, most of the studies with chromium were helpful if somebody had a deficiency, not helpful if they did not. And again, those were about 0.2%. And then apple cider vinegar, marginal fasting blood sugar changes, no consistent A1C data. Berberine, which was the strongest supplement candidate, showing around 0.5% in some trials, study trials,
the one without the S.
becomes trials, study and trials. But so one of the biggest trials with that was a study done in China, but that study's not been able to be replicated. And so if you're looking at what makes a good study, it should be repeatable. So then in the moderate range, so that was the low end. In the moderate range, you have your first line diabetes medications like metformin that we talked about, which typically reduces A1C by about 1 to 1.5. And that's 5 to 10 times the magnitude of the best supplement data. So put that in your back pocket and carry it around and measure it against any late night ad that you see. If they don't show you where their supplement can reduce A1C by 1.5 points, go to bed. That is your best time spent just going to bed, because you're just not going to get that in a supplement. And it does so with the mechanism that supports the core defect, which is suppressing the hepatic glucose output, putting the brakes on the liver, inappropriately releasing glucose when you don't need it in the bloodstream. And then at the high end, you have the interventions we just discussed with those 5 levers, structured weight loss programs targeting visceral fat, as in the direct trial as an example, producing those remission rates of up to 46%. Again, that was at the 6-month to 1 year mark, and you've got to sustain it across time to really have those same outcomes. Then you have the GLP-1 receptor agonists, which combine appetite regulation, weight loss, glucose-dependent insulin secretion, and cardiovascular risk reduction. And these produce A1C reductions somewhere in the 1.5 to 2%
Okay.
range, sometimes as low as 0.8%, but anywhere between 0.8 and 2% range. And in some rare cases, helping people achieve remission because they've lost visceral fat. And then resistance training combined with aerobic exercise consistently reduces A1C by 0.5 to 0.7% in meta-analysis, including cardiorespiratory fitness, increasing muscle mass, increasing insulin sensitivity, usually all at the same time, doing all of those things. And then high fiber dietary patterns, which in structured trials show A1C reductions about the same as metformin, which is a 0.0 to a 0.5% reduction. And then when you see these numbers side by side, you just cannot argue.
You can stack them. Yes.
Yeah.
It's not pick one, do all five.
Yep. Yeah. And the supplements are the thimble side of the scale.
And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, if we're talking about remission from type 2 diabetes, if the A1C is over 7, then really the majority of the effort is focused on let's get the A1C numbers down. And then once it's below 7, then it starts to get into the nuance of, oh, here's a high here with your blood sugar and that kind of stuff. But from a focus, wherever you're at on that type 2 spectrum, if your A1C is above 7, your main focus needs to be get the A1C down, which is what all 5 of these things do at scale. Really.
Yeah. Yeah. If your A1C is 10, you need to be pulling all of the levers.
Yes.
And some might argue, and some could argue that insulin is one of those levers because you need to fill what is missing, which is off, like you said, with your analogy of all the linebackers on top of the little pancreas.
Yeah.
Your pancreas cannot work with all those linebackers on top of it. So you might need insulin for a short time, early intervention to help preserve the pancreatic beta cells while you get all the linebackers off and the pancreas can come back into function. And all of that is very complicated and requires a full healthcare team. So when somebody asks me, have you seen such and such? Do you think this supplement works? The answer isn't, no, it doesn't work. It thimble works.
Yeah.
And
it's not even bringing a knife to a gunfight. It's bringing a knife to like a rocket fight. It's inappropriate for the scale of action that is needed. And the speed of action that's needed. Really can't stress enough.
Opportunity cost.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
If you have an A1C north of 7, those beta cells are compromised and almost certainly being diminished maybe daily. Save what function you have and start adopting these behaviors, start pulling these levers now and all of them and simultaneously.
Yep. So now how do you have these conversations with your physician, with your healthcare provider? So everything I've told you is like, you can take action on that today, but also in a broader scale of things to really keep it in context. Because as we said, if your A1C is 12, even these 5 levers at this time could potentially not be enough.
Don't go off of medication, get to a place where you can go off of medication.
Right, because if you have no energy to move, it's easy for us to sit here and say, move, get your sugar down. So for most people with type 2, acting on this is going to require a partnership with your healthcare team, a real one, not somebody on YouTube. And the problem that many people have described to me is that their appointment is 12 minutes long. They feel rushed. They get their A1C, maybe a medication adjustment, a generic instruction, eat better, avoid white foods, something, move more.
Right.
Shoo, out the door. And again, no blame or shame on anyone in this process other than large corporate healthcare entities, perhaps policy changes that need to occur.
Yeah. And we will beat this drum to death as well. All of the physicians that we've interacted with are doing the best they can under
and have the same grievances that there's not enough time to spend that they really want to with patients to make adequate change. And so we're not going to dissect that today. We have other episodes where we talk about that, but you might leave with an A1C number, but not really understanding exactly what that means in terms of your outcomes and how you might feel across time and what this is doing to your body in the long term. And you might leave with prescriptions, but not a really well planned out strategy, at least maybe one that you're not aware of. Maybe your doctor knows the strategy, but you don't. Right. And so with these questions that are unanswered, you might go on YouTube and in pops the Gundry or Dr. Oz ad, and you get 20 minutes of an explanation. They walk you through the mechanism. They help you feel seen and heard, and somebody finally explained why. And then they sell you the supplement for the problem that they created. And the supplement doesn't work, but that explanation felt better than anything you got in your doctor's office. And I understand that. And that's why we have this whole 4-part series. And I want to help you understand this dynamic without placing blame on your healthcare provider, who is almost certainly overworked, constrained by the insurance and the healthcare system that doesn't reward long conversations, but really changing how you show up to these appointments. Because I have untold conversations I've had, like countless amounts of conversations I've had with healthcare providers, that they'll say that they have appointments and it's called the go for the door. Mm-hmm. That's when the main issue comes up that they didn't know about, but now you're out of time to really dive into this. So anyway, the first tool is preparation. Before your next appointment, write down your 3 most important questions, not 10. 3, prioritize ruthlessly. So maybe you write them all down and you've got 12, cut it again. Yeah. The questions that tend to produce the most useful conversations sound something like this. Based on my current labs, which of the 5 main drivers of my diabetes do you think I should focus on first? Or is my current medication addressing the glucose output by my liver? Or the insulin sensitivity, or both? And are there options that might help me with weight? Or if I could change one thing in the next 90 days that would have the largest impact on my A1C, what would you recommend? And these questions work because they signal to your doctor that you understand the disease at a systems level, and it opens the door to strategic conversations rather than transactional. And the second tool is honestly about supplements. If you're taking supplements, no shame, tell your doctor. Do not hide it. Tell your pharmacist what you're taking, because a lot of people will hide the fact that they're taking supplements out of fear of judgment, out of fear of the doctor doesn't know what they're talking about. And I heard this and it really made sense, so I'm going to do it. But it should look something like, I'm taking berberine because I read it helps with blood sugar. I want your honest assessment of whether it's doing enough or whether I should consider something with stronger evidence, because that framing invites a real conversation instead of a lecture where you're like, no, what are you doing that for? And sometimes, to be fair, you're going to get, what are you doing that for? And the reason is the frustration with that they just don't have the time. Well, Dr. Oz,
in all fairness, if you don't have a good answer for why you're taking that supplement, if you can't, after listening to all 4 parts of this thing, if you cannot intelligently speak to the level of expected effect that this supplement is going to have on your A1C versus some of the other things that we've talked about, then maybe you shouldn't be taking the thing in the first place. I'm just putting that out there. Your information's free, and we've put out a lot here. We got over 4 hours just in this one series alone. That's how many conversations with your doctor. It's just like, from a volume standpoint, you are at this point, listener, equipped to make intelligent decisions regarding non-traditional treatment methods. Yeah.
Which brings us right into the third tool, which is asking about the scale of effect explicitly. So if your doctor recommends a change, whether it's a new medication, a dietary shift, an exercise goal, ask them, what kind of A1C could I realistically expect from this? And that question forces specificity. It moves the conversation from vague. So change happens in the specifics, and that moves the conversation from some vague advice to really measurable predictions of outcomes. And it gives you a way to evaluate progress. Like, this is what was expected. This is what happened. What can we do next time? How do we add? And then the fourth tool, and this one really matters so much, be willing to ask for a referral. If your primary care physician does not have the time to have these conversations with you, ask for a referral to an endocrinologist or a certified diabetes care and education specialist. These specialists exist primarily for this purpose. They can really take more time to dissect this, to look at the different parts of this, to tell you what you could reasonably expect from each of these interventions, and recommend different courses of action based on what your overall goals are. And they can really look at like what your medication options are, what would move the needle the most, build a basic nutrition plan, even more specifically, if you have a dietitian, certified diabetes care and education specialist. But then I've seen nurse diabetes care and education specialists do really great with areas like foot care and more nursing type interventions. And us dietitian diabetes care and education specialists tend to be better about the nutrition portion of it. And then there's also physical therapy. And that's why the programs out there for this really say that the evidence is overwhelming for a multidisciplinary care team for this, because each one has that hyper focus specific area that they're looking at. Right. And this is a multifactorial disease. So it's not a luxury. This is standard diabetes care. This is a standard of care from the American Diabetes Association, and you are entitled to it. I hear that word a lot with Medicare recipients and all of us who pay health insurance premiums. I'm entitled to this. So yeah, you want to use your insurance benefits as they're designed. So if your doctor dismisses your questions, talks over you, or makes you feel stupid for asking, that is a doctor problem or a healthcare provider problem, not a you problem. You deserve a provider who respects your engagement with your own health. And finding that provider, unfortunately, might take some effort. It's worth that effort. I know people who travel 90 minutes to go to an endocrinologist because they really love the person they're with at that place. So it's the thing that makes the other levers possible when you've got that really good therapeutic healthcare provider relationship. So then segment 6, evaluating any claim forever. So I'm going to give you something that outlasts these 4 episodes, the Grift, a permanent filter, a framework you can apply to any healthcare claim that you encounter for the rest of your life, whether it comes from a supplement ad, a celebrity doctor, a well-meaning relative. Nobody can relate to that, I'm sure. A headline or even a podcast. This framework has 4 questions, and I've been building toward them through this whole series. And if you've been listening closely, you already know what they're going to be, but I'm going to name them explicitly so you can carry them with you. Number 1, what proposed mechanism of action or how does this work? How does it actually address the biology or the pathophysiology? So it's like the path of disease process of the condition that I am experiencing in this moment. So that is the question from episode 1. If someone claims a supplement helps diabetes, ask, does this affect the glucose output of the liver? How does it affect insulin signaling within the skeletal muscle? How does it act on visceral fat? What about beta cell function? Does it have an effect on incretin hormones? And if the proposed mechanism is vague, it reduces inflammation. It just reduces it. But how? It reduces inflammation. But how? And here's where it kind of gets a little pickly, because if the how will oftentimes use scientific language that you don't understand, but it doesn't really, it's not A plus B equals C. It's this circular logic that is not true. So that's where it gets frightening. And that's when you can look at the other part of this is that person selling what they're peddling. So if I'm recommending this and I'm also selling this, that is a red flag. That is a caution flag to be more skeptical with this. The other one is, what is the scale of the effect and how does it measure against proven interventions? So as we just covered that. And then does this claim align with, or does it contradict the weight of evidence from major research institutions and professional organizations? So no single study proves anything. No single doctor's opinion outweighs the accumulated evidence from thousands of clinical trials. If a claim requires you to believe that the American Diabetes Association, the Endocrine Society, the American Heart Association, and decades of metabolic research are all wrong, and that this one person on YouTube has figured out what everybody else has missed, what everybody else is keeping from you, the probability is overwhelmingly against the YouTube person or personality. Consensus can be wrong. It's been wrong before, but the maverick versus establishment narrative is far more often a marketing strategy than a genuine scientific revolution. So those questions, your mechanism, your scale, the incentive, the consensus, those are your filter. You can use them on anything. Use them on this podcast. If we ever make a claim that can't survive those 4 questions, you should discard it. Let us know about it. Ask about it. That's the whole point. The goal isn't to create a new authority for you to trust uncritically. The goal is to make you a better evaluator of authority, including mine. So what you deserve is to not spend billions of dollars. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry, the supplement, the wellness grift industry. And most of these supplements do not work on a scale that matters. But the story has always been through this 4-part series. What is underneath the want for that supplement ad to be true? It's about that person lying awake at 1 a.m, glucose reading on the nightstand, scrolling through their phone, looking for answers, the fear of complications, being told you're not enough, the hope, the very human and understandable hope that maybe this one thing, and I have talked to this person in some embodiment of like, one day I'll find that thing that is the answer.
The difference is we've said that it is simple, not easy. What they're offering is ease. What they're offering is just take this. The truth of the matter is there's no substitute for the not easy. The not easy is what works.
Yeah. I mean, with that, I think like that is a pin in it. That is really the truth. That hope is the engine of survival. And we're not here to squelch the hope, but rather give you hope that the answers are out there. Yeah. It's very straightforward, very simple, not easy.
Yeah.
Lots of things.
Diabetes is not a battle. It is a war, and it is going to require a tremendous amount of work to put this thing into remission, but that doesn't have to happen today.
Yeah.
It needs to start today, but the effort needs to be consistent. Yeah. And over time, this is absolutely something that you can win if you start doing the things that actually put that disease into remission.
And I want to challenge you to understand that the hope should not be placed in that supplement. The hope is misplaced in that supplement. The hope is within you. The hope comes from you. You're scrolling at night because you have hope. So dig into and dive into that hope and do things that really
for those of you that stick around to the end of the episode, we end every single one with take courage. You can do this and we can help, because that is true. It will require courage to adopt a lot of these new behaviors, but you can do it and we can help.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Amber, this was another good one. A nice bow on our 4-part series. A lot of fun.
I did too. I think doing the research for this, I learned a lot. So I really hope that this, because it's always been that like, but why are these so compelling? And even as a dietitian myself, sometimes I would read these and I'm like, is there something in me? Am I missing this? Like,
am I riddled with parasites?
It's completely understandable how these hook you. They are well researched, marketed to do just that. And if I can become, so I haven't necessarily, like, it's been a long time since I bought this hook, line, and sinker, like bought it, but the fact that it has taken up my time in many, like, I'm like, let me see where this is going to go. Like I just would love for people to think about how much money and how many hours they have spent in this and just take a moment to vow that it ends here. Like no more time, energy, money towards this from this moment forward. And if you can't make that commitment, maybe rewatch all that, watch the Grift part 1 through 4 again, because this is not a good use of your energy, hope, and resources.
Absolutely. Well, that's it for this one. Thank you for listening to the Diabetes Podcast. You now know the 5 levers to lower your A1C. But if you want to understand exactly why your body's resisting insulin in the first place, you need to know what's happening inside your cells. Feel free to check out our playlist on the 12 core defects of type 2 diabetes. And until next time, take courage. You can do this, and we can help.